When darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain are all I know, oh, I won't be shaken. Oh, I won't be shaken. It's my fear. It's my fear. It doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear. It doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear. It doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer. Shame no longer has a place to hide. And I am not a captive to the lies. No, I'm not afraid to leave my past behind, because I won't be shaken. And no, I won't be shaken. My fear, it doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear, it doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear, it doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Sing that again, my fear. Your fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear, it doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear, it doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Oh. There's power. There's power that can break off every chain. Oh, there's power that can empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that I can't save, 'cause there's power in your name. There's power in your name. There's power that can break off every chain. Oh, there's power that can empty out a grave. Oh, there's resurrection power that I can't save, 'cause there's power in your name. There's power in your name. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. And my fear, it doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. And my fear, it doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. One more time, my fear. Sing this out. Yeah, my fear, it doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear, it doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear, it doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. 'Cause I am standing on the rock, and I am standing in your love. And I am standing on the rock, and my firm foundation is my firm foundation. You stood before. and you stood before creation. Eternity in your hands, and you spoke the earth into motion. My soul now to stand. You stood before my failure and carried the cross for my shame, and my sin weighed upon your shoulders. My soul now to stand. What can I say? So what can I say? And what can I do? But offer this heart, oh God, completely to you. And I'll walk upon the salvation. Is your spirit alive in me? And my life to declare your promise. My soul now to stand. So what? So what can I say? And what can I do? Oh, but offer this heart, oh God, completely to you. What can I say? So what can I say? And what can I do? Oh, but offer this heart, oh God, completely to you. So I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered all. I am, that is yours. So I'll stand, I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. So I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered all. I am, that is yours, because all I am, that is yours. All I am, because all I am, that is yours.
Dear COVID-19, you shut our doors. You've tried to isolate us. You've tried to silence our praise. You've tried to stop us from caring for those in need. And it seems like you're only getting started. But COVID-19, we declare, no weapon formed against us shall prosper. We choose to trust the unknown to an all-knowing God, and we will express the heart of an ever-loving God. Buildings cannot contain our faith. Scarcity will not dictate our generosity. Fear will never keep us from serving the vulnerable. We are the church, and for His glory we rise as one. Sincerely, us. .
Good morning, I'm John Kingsbury, and I'm an elder here at Malibu Pacific Church. I also sit on the missions committee, which gives me an opportunity to work with my favorite organization, which is Compassion International. Why are they my favorite, you ask? First of all, they're Christ-centered. They help the poorest of the poor children throughout the world. They help the children with the greatest needs. And they know the needs because they are there with the kids. They don't have any ulterior motives. They're there to love their neighbors for the children. What makes them distinct? They are sponsoring or caring for 1.9 million children throughout the world. They work with 8,000 plus Christian churches, and they partner with they've been working with them for 65 years. One of those churches is Malibu Pacific Church. We support 160 kids who are also in poverty, also throughout the world. I support 3 of those kids myself, and it's a pleasure. It's a miracle. In return, they receive an education. They receive medications, clothing. What am I missing? Education, food, medical care. And best of all, the most important part is they receive an education on the love of our Lord Jesus Christ. Now is the time of year when we hold our sponsorship drive. If you're interested in learning more, and I hope you are, please go to the address you see on the bottom of the screen, and you'll find out everything you need to know about sponsoring a child at Compassion International. Thank you very much, and praise the Lord.
One of the hallmarks of the Christian faith is the concept of grace. It is fundamental to understanding how God relates to us as individuals. We value the concept of grace so much that we use it in our songs and our hymns. Often churches, denominations, Christian institutions will have the word grace somewhere in it. When I was a child and we would always say the blessing before the meal, we called it grace. Sometimes Christians will use it when they're talking to other Christians and say, may the grace of God be with you. It is fundamental to Christianity. Now, if you're not a Christian, you may say, well, what is grace? What's so important about it? Let me illustrate the most significant way that grace has been manifested by God to us. As a follower of Jesus Christ, those of us who serve him, we believe that God created the world, and in that world, he put 2 human beings, Adam and Eve. They were put there to honor him and to serve him. But the day came when they rebelled and they disbelieved God. And as a result, they sinned. And because of that, the entire human race is plagued by this thing called sin. The penalty for sin is death, not just physical death, but eternal separation from God. And when the humans became sinners, when that happened to us, there is nothing we can do to please God. But God in his love, in his compassion, decided to do what was best for us. And so God, in the person of Jesus Christ, who was fully God and fully human, came to this earth, died on the cross, paid the price for sin, which is not just physical death, but spiritual death. And because of that, when I believe in Jesus Christ, I am given a relationship with God. I am told that I will live with him for eternity. And God's behavior demonstrated giving me something I couldn't earn, I didn't deserve. John Newton was known as a man who not only served on slave ships, but was a captain of a slave ship. And later on in his life, when he became a follower of Jesus Christ, he realized that for much of his life, he had ruined the lives of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, that the slaves he carried were doomed to a horrible existence because of what he had done. And so he penned the hymn that perhaps today is the most famous hymn of Christianity, because even people who aren't followers of Jesus Christ know that hymn. It's Amazing Grace that saved a wretch like me. Newton said, I did not deserve what God did for me, but God was gracious. So as Christians, those of us who follow Christ, we value grace. But there's a problem that we have, because those of us who have experienced God's grace in salvation sometimes begin to involve ourselves in what I call the downside of grace. I mean, grace is awesome. It's God's blessing to us. But there comes a time when we don't appreciate grace, take advantage of grace, and there's a downside to it. To illustrate this, I want to talk about probably the most famous of all the judges. Movies have been made about him. Books have been written about him. His name is Samson. And so Israel, as they have done throughout the entire book of Judges, has gone off into idolatry, and they're worshiping other gods. And so God, as he has done before, raises up an oppressor. In this case, it's the neighboring nation of the Philistines. And for 40 years, the Philistines have plagued Israel, taken their harvest, basically made them vassals of that nation in their own land. And Israel cries out to God as they've done before, and God says, I will send a judge. And that particular judge is Samson. Now, if there's anyone who experienced the blessings of God, it is Samson. In fact, look with me, if you would, at the list as we examine what God did for him. First of all, it was a miraculous birth. God came to Manoah's wife, who could not have children, and said, you're going to get pregnant, and you're going to have a son, and that son will deliver Israel. Now, you can really count on one hand the times that God or his angel came to announce the birth of a child. He did it with Isaac. He did it with John the Baptist. Of course, he did it with Jesus, but he also did it with Samson. When she shared this with her husband, he said, I want to hear that from God. And God showed up, and God told Manoah, you are going to have a son, and he will be Israel's deliverer. Manoah said, can I bring you a sacrifice? And God says, yes. And when he did, God touched the sacrifice and disappeared in the smoke. And Manoah knew that God had been gracious to him and to his wife, and Samson would be born. The Bible also says that while Samson was growing up, he was blessed by God. It says that the Spirit stirred in him. In those days, the Spirit didn't come upon everybody. But even when he was young, the Spirit came and stirred Samson and directed him toward what God wanted to accomplish. But then Samson became the only true human superhero. We've heard a lot about the superheroes in the last number of years because of the movies, but we know that all of them are made up. Now, when I was growing up, we didn't have a lot of superheroes. My superhero was Superman. For some, it was Batman. For others, it was the Green Hornet. But there was a human superhero, and his name was Samson. Just to look at some of the things he's done. One time, a young lion attacks him, and Samson kills it. At another time, he kills 30 men. He gets angry, and he goes out and he gathers 300 foxes. If you can imagine, not just Samson's strength, but his agility, his speed, his reflexes, to not only capture one fox, but to get 299 more animals and put them together. He's attacked by 1,000 armed men. He picks up the jawbone of an ass and he kills them all. And then later, when he's in the city, a Philistine city, and the Philistines think, we've got him, let's lock the gates. In the middle of the night, when he wants to leave, he literally takes the gates of those cities, picks them up, puts them on his shoulders, and carries them uphill and deposits them outside the city. I mean, Samson was a man who was blessed by God. God had poured blessing after blessing after blessing after blessing. But Samson began to experience the downside of grace. It's interesting when we read the Bible narrative about Samson. It records some acts at the beginning of his life, and then it records some acts at the end of his life. And in the beginning part, where we will see how Samson begins to, in a sense, despise God's grace, misuse God's grace, there's a prayer. And that prayer will reflect why. At the end of his life, there's another prayer, which is very different from the first. So to see how Samson struggled with God's grace, look at this list. He's about 18 or 19. He goes 4 miles away to a town that is a Philistine town, sees this young girl, and comes back to his mother and father and says, I want her for my wife. Now, God had been very clear that the nation of Israel was not to intermarry with other nations. They were idolatrous nations, and God knew that if they intermarried, they would begin to follow those gods. But Samson says, I want her. And so the parents begin to orchestrate that marriage. Now, in the process of getting married to her, which was a 7-day celebration, he was given 300 groomsmen. And while he's with the groomsmen, he tells them a riddle. You see, on one of his excursions between those two towns was when the young lion had attacked him. He kills the lion. The next time he goes by, he stops and sees the carcass, and bees are beginning to form a hive in there. And he reaches in and takes some of the honey. And he says to these 30 men, I have a riddle for you. What is strong and yet produces sweetness? Well, they had no idea. And so for 7 days, they badger Samson's wife, browbeat her, say, get Samson to give you the answer, because they had made a bet. If they couldn't figure out the riddle, they had to give Samson each a new set of clothes. But Samson said, if you figure out the riddle, I'll give you each a set of clothes. Samson tells his wife the answer. She relays it to the 30 men. And Samson, when he hears that they know the riddle and he has to ante up on the bet, is so angry that he goes to another town and he kills 30 men in order to take some of their clothes and answer the bet. Now, he goes home. He is so angry. But later the anger cools. He goes back to be with his wife. And when he gets there, the father says to Samson, I thought you were so angry with us. I've already given her to another man. Again, Samson's anger boils over. And this is when he goes out and he tracks down and captures 300 of these wily, sly animals that are the foxes. He puts them in pairs together, ties them together, takes a torch, ties it to the tails, and lets them loose in the Philistine harvest. And all of a sudden, like we see here in California, the fields are ablaze and the Philistines lose their harvest. They are so angry that 1,000 armed men come to the Israelis. They say, we want Samson. He's living over here in a cave. And so the Israelis go to Samson and they say, the Philistines have come after you. He says, do you promise not to kill me? They said, we won't kill you. He said, then tie me up and take me to those 1,000 armed men. When he sees them, he breaks the ropes just as though they were thread, picks up the jawbone of an ass, and begins to kill and chase until 1,000 men are dead. Now, it is true that when he's killing these other 30 men, when he's killing the 1,000 soldiers, he's helping Israel get out of the domination of the Philistines. But the reasons behind it are because of who Samson is and what he's been doing. At the end of his life, we read how he is going into Philistia and sleeping with prostitutes. And at the very end of his life, he's having an affair with that Philistine woman, Delilah, who seduces him to find out the secret to his strength. Now, here's a man who has been blessed by God, and yet time after time after time, he does these things that go against the will of God. And the question is, why? I think the answer is found in the first prayer. After he kills those 1,000 men, he is thirsty, highly thirsty. I mean, you just got to have water right away. And I want you to follow along as I look at his prayer. In Samson's first prayer, he says, "You have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" Now, listen to the tone of that prayer. God, I've done what you've wanted. You gave me the strength and I've used it and I've killed 1,000 Philistines. Now, give me some water. Do this. You want me to die? You want me to be captured? God, do what I want. And this, I believe, reflects the downside of grace, because Samson is doing what we who are Christ followers often do. We come to learn that often the blessings that have been given to us by God soon become rights that we expect. I remember some years ago listening to a famous speaker in Christian circles, and he talked about how when his children were in middle and high school, the fall semester was over and they had really done well in their grades. And so he said, since we lived in Colorado, I took them up into the Rockies over the Christmas vacation for a skiing holiday. He said the next semester, when the midterm grades came out, they were doing well again. And so I said, let's go up before the ski lodges close and the ski runs are empty. Let's get that last snow. And I took him on another vacation. He said, now next fall, I had planned a whole different event for the holidays. But about halfway through the fall semester, 2 of his children came and said, when are we going skiing again, Dad? Our grades are really good. And he realized that what he had given to them as a gift had now become a right. It's like the entrepreneur, small company, maybe he has 30 or 40 employees. The year goes by and it's been a prosperous year. It's been a good year. And so she decides to give her employees a bonus. The next year is also a good year financially, and she gives bonuses again. But the third year, it's not a good year. And basically income and expenses are about even. There's not much profit. And so she doesn't give bonuses. But you know, and I know, that many of those employees who had gotten bonuses the first 2 years assume they're going to get a bonus the third year. I mean, we've worked just as hard. We've done our job. We've put in our time. We deserve a bonus. Because often that which is given to us on several times or several occasions becomes a right. After pastoring for 3 years, having gotten out of seminary, I was invited to move from the East Coast to Colorado to teach at a Bible college. God had called us. It was clear. God had done some things to say, this is what I want you to do. When we lived on the East Coast, we lived in a manse that was owned by the church. 3-bedroom house, 2 bathrooms, a large yard, and our son just loved to play in that yard. It was a beautiful house, relatively new. But when we moved to Colorado, we had no money. We didn't have any equity because it had been a manse. And Bible colleges notoriously don't pay well. At that time, the housing prices in Denver were almost behind LA in terms of rising because the economy, it was an inflationary economy and prices were going up. And there was no way on what I was making we could get into a house. All we could afford was a mobile home. Yes, I have lived in a house that has wheels. But what was worse than living in a mobile home was living in a trailer park. And I remember when we pulled up to that trailer the first time and my wife looked at it and cried. When my son, who was used to this big yard, got angry with God because he had no place to play. And as I would say to God, God, don't you know what I'm doing? This first semester, I've got to get up early because I'm preparing all new classes. I'm serving the students. I'm trying to help them prepare for ministry. And all the other faculty have homes, but we don't have a home. God, why do we have to live here? and I began to experience the downside of grace. You see, most of us, if we think about it, no matter where we are in the United States economically, there's some exceptions. But for most of us, whether we're real rich or whether we're in lower income, most of us have a home. It's heated in the winter. Many of them are cooled in the summer. We have an automobile. Many of us have a job. And compared to most of the world, we live like kings. But for many of us, the blessings of God have become things we expect. And you can tell that by the way we pray. Whenever there's difficulty, suffering, the loss of a job, poor health, when there's the pandemic and I'm stuck in my house and I'm lonely, when a loved one dies, often the question we ask of God is why? Why does this happen to me? And when I pray and ask God why, the assumption behind that is, I don't deserve this. I'm one of your children. I've experienced your grace, but your grace has now become what I expect. I expect a certain kind of house. I expect to be able to drive a certain car. I expect we should have health. I expect that the sufferings of this world shouldn't touch me or my family. And the downside of grace is when that which is the blessing of God, because if we think about it, all the good things I have come from the blessings of God. Now, we come to the end of Samson's life. He's been having an affair with Delilah. She's seducing him. The Philistine leaders are saying, find out his secret. And finally, Samson tells Delilah, it's my hair. I was born to be a Nazarite. Meant I only ate anything that was kosher. I did not touch strong drink. I didn't go to funerals. I wasn't to be around dead people. And my hair is where my strength comes from. He falls asleep. Delilah cuts his hair. The Philistines come in as they've had in the past. He says, I'm going to defeat them. And instead, it only takes 2 or 3 men to subdue him. They put out his eyes, they put him in prison, and they begin to reestablish their rule over Israel. And then they throw this big celebration. Probably in their temple, it says there were at least 3,000 people there in this big building, men and women. They said, bring Samson out. We want to mock him and jeer at him. He comes out. He says to the person leading him by the hand, put me with a pillar so I can lean on them. And then he prays a different prayer. Look at this prayer. Sovereign Lord, the God above gods, remember me. Not look at who I am, not look at what I've done. Would you just remember me? Please, God, strengthen me just once more and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Oh, this is a prayer of humility. God, I deserve nothing. You're in charge, but would you, if possible, in your grace, give me strength one more time? The Bible says that when Samson then pulled those pillars apart, the roof fell. Everyone was killed. And Samson killed more Philistines in his death than he had in his life, because he came to learn the value of grace. That grace means whatever I have, my brains, my tenacity, my job, my talents, have all come from God. It was interesting. God used my experience to say, Paul, when are you just going to trust me and thank me for what you have? And I remember praying, God, I realize I don't deserve a house. But if in your grace, you'll give us one, that would really be nice. And God performed 2 or 3 very specific miracles that in that economy, with no resources, got us into a house. You see, God has been gracious to us who are followers of Jesus Christ. And we can demonstrate that grace to others as we show humility and the recognition that whatever I have comes from the hand of God. I encourage you right now to think about these words as you listen to the hymn, Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home.
I want to remind you again that at Malibu Pacific Church, we have a brand new app. We told you about it last week, and I want to encourage you, whether it's for your device or your laptop or smart TV, whatever it is, go to the App Store and download the app. You'll see what it looks like up here in the corner of the screen. And when you go to that app, download it, and then it will be you can actually look at the virtual service. You can look at past services. You can hear music. There's even a Bible on there that you can do for Bible reading. You can take notes. In fact, this week, when I turned to the app, there's actually the slides from the sermon and from the scripture reading, and you can have that as you look at the sermon or say to someone else, you might want to see the sermon. You have those on there for you. Now, soon we hope to be able to make it possible to have some chat rooms, to do other things with the app, to register for things. But we want to encourage you, go to Malibu Pacific Church, find the app, download it, and then you will have access to a number of things about the church, the events that are going on, and we just want to encourage you to do that. By the way, you can now give through the app. Whether you want to still do it by texting or mailing a check, that's fine, but you can also give through the app. And having said that, I've been amazed at how people have been faithful with their giving during this time of the pandemic. Thank you for that. There's a lot of ministry going on. As I've said before, the church hasn't closed. We're having to do it differently. We're having to do it in different ways. But I want to thank you for your giving and for your support to the work of Malibu Pacific Church. Now, in light of all of that, I want to say, as you leave this service that is in your home, or if you're in the car or on the phone, may you, if you're a follower of Christ, value God's grace in your life and live with the understanding that grace is a privilege, not a right, in order to bring glory and honor to our gracious God and to help other people want to have the grace you have received through the salvation of Jesus Christ. Amen.